In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, the author of Hebrews likens the Christian life to a race, and he encourages us to run the race with endurance. Here's what he writes: "Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." So we're to run the race of faith with endurance, with perseverance, with wholeheartedness. In light of the amazing examples of those who've gone before us, of the great cloud of witnesses, like the greats of the faith from Hebrews 11, whose lives of faith are in the stands, surrounding us, encouraging us, we're given 3 exhortations so we can run the race well. Exhortation number 1, we're to lay aside every weight. We're to lay aside every burden, every encumbrance, all that weighs us down. Like an athlete, we need to lay aside everything that slows us down. Runners wear light clothing, not heavy parkas. What kinds of things potentially weigh us down? Past failures, unrealized hopes, trials, hardships, wrong thinking. We're to lay these things aside, to put them off, to cast them away. Exhortation number 2, we're to lay aside the sin which so easily ensnares us. Sin can ensnare us, encircle us, entangle us. We're to lay it aside. The first century readers are wrestling with the sin of unbelief. They're being tempted to return to the old covenant. They're considering the possibility of turning away from Christ, of approaching God based on their good works. The readers are being exhorted to lay this sin aside, to believe God's promises. It's by grace that we're saved. It's by grace that we walk the Christian walk. Other common sin areas include the sin of idolatry, the sin of bitterness, the sin of lust, the sin of covetousness, and many more. The sin of idolatry, being preoccupied with some focus other than God, some work of our hands, some object of worship. The sin of bitterness, being preoccupied with past wrongs, thoughts of getting even, instead of forgiving our offender, praying for those who've wronged us, and releasing offenses into God's hands. The sin of lust, being preoccupied with out-of-bounds thoughts that are not God's direction or God's timing. And the sin of covetousness, being preoccupied with acquiring things we do not have, drawing our security from things instead of from God. All of these sins and others can ensnare us. Thus, we need to lay them aside. And finally, there's exhortation number 3. We're to look to Jesus. We run the race by looking unto Jesus. He's the author, that's the originator, and he's the finisher, the completer, the perfecter of our faith. He brings us to maturity. We're not to focus on ourselves or on circumstances or on worldly opinions. We're to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Just as he endured the suffering of the cross for the joy set before him, the joy of sitting at the Father's right hand and of seeing people set free from sin, we too can endure for the joy set before us, the joy of entering Christ's glory. Let's be those who run the race of faith with endurance, who lay aside every weight, who say no to ensnaring sin, and who keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Thanks for listening.